The global high tax mafia is at it again. Now they're talking about a global wealth tax, taking a slice of everything you have every year, all so they can have more control. Today, I'm going to tell you their devious plan and what you can do to protect yourself. Our strategy and research teams follow these kinds of taxes, and we've been looking at this for a while, but I was reminded that we should talk about this by a viewer named Gino, who said, I read in the Dutch version of the Financial Times that the Netherlands, together with France, are working on a proposal to tax all the hardworking millionaires and billionaires wherever they are, aka a global wealth tax for successful folks. First was a global corporate tax, and now they are coming for your wealth and want to tax you wherever you are. Now let's set a couple things straight here. You are seeing more European countries talking about bringing back a wealth tax. There only are a couple left that still have them, and even then, they could be rather low or only under special circumstances. A lot of European countries got rid of their wealth taxes around the turn of the century because they just weren't working that well. The juice wasn't worth the squeeze. Now, desperate times call for desperate measures. Hey, that thing that never worked before, let's bring that back. That'll play well with the voters. So that's a wealth tax. They tax you on a percentage of what you earn based on where you live. So if you live in Switzerland, then you pay wealth tax according to Switzerland. If you are a Swiss citizen who leaves Switzerland, well, then you can exit that tax system. Now, the answer to that, being able to leave the tax system as an individual, we have talked about how on 2 occasions now, the French government is talking seriously about passing a law that would implement what's called citizenship-based taxation. Americans have had this going back to the Civil War times in the U.S., and this means even if you don't live in the country, you're still a tax resident. You're still a taxpayer. Now, in the U.S., there are exemptions and there are exclusions. That's how we can help Americans reduce their taxes by anywhere from 80 to 100%, depending on their family structure, their business structure, and where they're willing to move overseas. So Americans can still reduce their taxes. There's a lot of extra paperwork that comes with it, and they're never fully out of the system. The minute they stop following that plan, they need a new plan. They're never gone from the IRS, from the tax man. France now wants to do the same thing. A few other Western countries have talked about it, at least certain politicians have, basically making you a slave. You're a citizen of our country, you have to pay the price. And you see more people in favor of this. You see more people saying, well, yeah, if you go to Dubai and you need our consular services, you should pay the price. So let me get this straight. I'm a 7-figure earner who's going to pay hundreds of thousands of euros in taxes every year so that perhaps one time I can walk into an embassy and have them send me to the hospital or give me a lawyer referral. Really? Does that sound fair? Well, it does sound fair because people in these Western countries are increasingly desperate. What do desperate people do? They want someone else to pay the price. And you can say in a way, that's why Donald Trump got elected twice. People are not feeling taken care of. They're not feeling heard by their politicians. All they see is their standard of living going down. They can't afford to have 3 cars anymore. They can't afford to have as big of a house. They can't afford to have mom stay at home. Why? Everything's more expensive. I would argue the politicians created that problem, not the capitalists. But they're just like, hey, this guy says he can fix it. I'm going to put that guy in charge. And in some cases, those politicians that they put in charge come out and say, hey, you rich fat cats got to pay more. And that means even if you leave the country. So those are 2 things they're trying to do. Neither of those is what we're going to talk about today. What there is talk of is a global minimum wealth tax. Now, Elizabeth Warren, the progressive U.S. senator from Massachusetts, has said, hey, let's have a wealth tax in the United States. She put out a whole plan. We've talked about it. That was years ago. And she said, the one thing, alluding to those wealth taxes in Europe that got shut down because they didn't work, the one thing we have, she said, is the U.S. has citizenship-based taxation. You think if you're an American, your politicians, oh, they just don't know. They've forgotten that we pay taxes. No. They know very well. Elizabeth Warren apparently is very in favor of you being taxed no matter where you live. And surely there are politicians in your country now, if you're not American, that believe the same thing. How dare you carry our passport? You're not one of us unless you pay for the privilege. You're not part of the family unless you pay. And so Elizabeth Warren said the solution to a global wealth or to a wealth tax would be that Americans pay tax globally. So if I'm a U.S. citizen, and I no longer am, but if I live in a tax-friendly country and I have assets around the world, Elizabeth Warren's plan would tax me on those. What the proposal from the high tax mafia, I'm calling them, would do is make that apply to everybody if you hit certain thresholds. They would take away your flexibility, your optionality, your ability to make choices for where you want to live. Let me tell you, as someone who's gone to the lengths of giving up U.S. citizenship, I've talked about this in other episodes. It's not just about, I don't want to pay taxes. I don't really see people renouncing doing it only for that reason. There's people who don't like paying taxes. Most of them don't renounce their citizenship. It's about more than that. They don't want you to be able to live anywhere else. They want to force you not only to pay them, but to agree with all of their policies. And so there's sort of a mafia because some of these guys live in Paris. They don't pay a dime in taxes. They get chauffeured around. They've got a better life than many of us do. They're held in high regard with their faux intellectualism, going around and telling the rest of us what to do while not adhering to their own policies. French economist Gabriel Zucman, this is from the Nomad Capitalist R&D team, at the request of the G20, presented a blueprint, and I'm going to come back to that G20 point, that's important, in a minute, has presented a blueprint for a coordinated minimum tax on ultra-high net worth individuals equal to 2% of their wealth. One thing we know is these taxes always start high. They eventually come down because who's in control of inflation? Not me, not you. I'd say guys like this are more in charge of inflation, and all of his buddies, all of his cronies, they're more in charge of inflation, so they can inflate whatever cap they put on this, and they can have it affect more people, or they can just lower the number because they're never going to be happy with how much money they collect. Guys like this are always going to have their hand out looking for more money, and just look at what's happening in California. Even left-wing people are saying it doesn't cost $1.8 million to build a unit of housing for the homeless. That is a grift. That is consulting fees. Look at why Kamala Harris just lost the election, by the way. What are they calling it? The consulting class got too involved. Everyone got their hands in. Everyone got rich. No one delivered the result. You think guys like this are ever going to have enough money to run their hands through and take a little slice out of? I doubt it. So whatever number they start at, ultra high net worth, the banking community would say that's $30 million. $30 million is a lot of money. You could sell a relatively average company that you started and easily get $30 million. 6x multiple, that company makes $5 million a year. Maybe you built that in 1 year. Maybe it took you a whole generation to build it up. Now you got $30 million plus whatever you saved. It's doable if you're an entrepreneur. It's doable if you're a good investor. It is certainly, they say it's about 600,000 people. I imagine it's more than that. It's a couple million people in the world, but it's doable. And so what is that? It's a pot of wealth. Why does Willie Sutton rob banks? That's where the money is. Why does Gabriel Zucman want to tax people like this? That's where the money is. They need more money. They couldn't solve the problems of peace and hunger and all those things on their own. They've already taken gazillions of your dollars. They couldn't solve those problems while they're driving around and being chauffeured around Paris. If only you give them more money, they'll solve your problem. But here's what he wants to do. The report estimates the tax could raise up to $250 billion annually if levied on billionaires. Now, what would they do with that money? I mean, Elon Musk, whether you like him or not, Elon Musk, what did he tweet out? How much will it cost to solve world hunger? Tell me and I'll pay it. Give me the plan and I'll pay it. Hamana. They don't want to solve the problem. Give them another $250 billion. They will waste it. It will solve nothing. They'll be coming back. The billionaires didn't pay enough. They got to pay more because we can't. No. The problem is guys like Gabriel Zucman. They want more of your money, so they're in control. But he says they'll raise $250 billion annually if levied on billionaires, or up to $380 billion annually if levied on centimillionaires, those with $100 million and above. Gabriel Zucman wishes to replicate the global minimum tax, which has been introduced on corporations. So if you have a big corporation, they have a 15% global tax rate. If your company is smaller, it's too small to qualify. If you're not in the hundreds of millions of euros in revenue every year, then you can still pay the lower rate, which is why our clients still can have companies that pay 0% and 2% and 3% and 5%. Once you get up to, Google League, you're going to pay 15%. Gabriel Zucman wants to replicate that. He wants to replicate the tax on corporations by basically saying, hey, no matter where you are in the world, you got to pay. He wants a similar tax that would target individuals who are billionaires. I think I've met guys like this before. I've met these guys who you sit with them for dinner and all night they talk about various billionaires and somehow they're all bad, even though they've met none of them. They're all terrible people. I think he's probably just a guy who just kind of hates and is envious of billionaires. He has stated he does not want to stop the tax there. Oh, why would we do that? As he wants to target centimillionaires as well, because you're all nasty, disgusting pig. What has he created? I was given zero, other than a good education on how to be successful in life. And I tend to hew towards people like that who are self-made. Guess what? No matter how you get the money, somebody had to make it. And I don't know why Gabriel Zucman feels entitled to take it. But here's what he wants to do. Option 1, a presumptive income tax. So how is he going to squeeze you for 2% of your wealth every year? By the way, he's going to be the guy that makes sure with his pals the interest rates stay low. So if you want to be conservative, you might lose money every year. But let's go through the options. Let's be fair. Option 1, a presumptive income tax. The ultra high net worth individuals would be presumed to earn a certain fraction of their wealth in income. So you got $100 million. Hey, we're going to assume you can make 4% a year on this. I'd like to see this guy make a dime that's not given to him by some government or non-governmental entity. I'd like to see this guy make 10 cents. But for you, they'll assume you'll make some amount of money. I'm guessing it won't be 1%. They'll assume you make 4 or 5%, and then they'll figure out whatever tax rate they want to tax that income at, and that's effectively the tax. So if it's 50% tax on 4%, there's your 2% gone every year. Gone. Option 2 is wealth taxation, a direct wealth tax rate of 2%. It would be key to include all forms of wealth in the tax base. And so here's why Europe gave up on it, a lot of the European countries. How much do you tax Steve Wynn's art collection? You'd think, I know that these Western countries are becoming less democratic and they're becoming more authoritarian. If you're going to call yourself a free society, you've got to give Steve Wynn some chance to say, hey, here's my valuation for this Picasso. You can't just tell him what it's worth, as if Gabriel Zucman would know Picasso from his tuchus. So I think that's going to be pretty difficult. Obviously, holding your money in Bitcoin or cash or equities is much easier to measure. What's real estate worth? What's real estate in countries that we talk about where it may be a little bit more illiquid worth? I'll come back to that in a minute. Income tax, here's option 3. Income tax on a broad notion of income, including unrealized capital gains, known as the billionaire minimum income tax. Those are the kinds of names that always play well with the voters, right? Proposed in the U.S. by Biden and Kamala. And so that's the unrealized capital gains tax, basically. And so, this goes on and on and on. They put together a whole report and to talk about with our clients. They want to make this international because the idea is, hey, if we do this in France, what do French people do? Well, historically, they moved to Belgium. Go back and watch my video about what you should do if you live in France. Step 1, don't move to Belgium. If you're going to move, make it worth your while. They want to get together and say, hey, Belgium's going to be on the same page. Yeah, you can't escape it there. You can't move somewhere else. Now, again, this flies in the face of you're driving on the roads and the bridges and your kids are going to the schools. If you move and they're no longer using the roads and the bridges and the schools, what exactly are you paying for? Oh, just shut up, Gabriel Zucman says. You're ruining my plan to take all your money and spend it on my whims. And so the plan would be get as many countries together as they did with the corporate minimum tax, and say, we're all going to sign on that we'll make people pay no matter where they live. Here's where the G20 part comes in at the beginning. G20, OECD, these are more or less, the OECD countries, certainly, it's a high tax mafia. They get together. If you did this in your business, you'd be in prison. They get together and say, hey, how do we bully the countries that don't have high taxes to have higher taxes under threat of sanctions and being cut off from the financial system and being blacklisted? How do we get the countries that are competing with us and winning? I know what we'll do. We'll have a mafia. We'll all get together and bully them. And that's what the G20, and then more so the OECD does, the people that Gabriel Zucman hangs out with. They don't want competition. They want you to have competition. Look at the Biden administration. Look at Lena Khan. She's not approving mergers. Why? It's not competitive. But when a country in the Middle East says, hey, yeah, we'll have zero tax. Bring your business here, please. We just want to build our country. We have enough money. We have roads. They're better roads than you have. Have you seen the roads in Dubai? I was just in Oman filming Live Like a King Oman. Have you seen the roads in Oman? Believe me, they're better than whatever roads you have where the taxes are 40 to 50%. Believe me. Those countries are like, yeah, bring your wealth. Now, maybe they'll go from 0% to 5% tax one of these days. There's talk of that. Still a lot more competitive. Still not satisfactory for the Gabriel Zucmans and G20s and OECDs. But what did we see in the global minimum tax conversation on corporations? We saw smaller countries, a number of which were in emerging Africa, saying this screws us. The very people that you think the Gabriel Zucmans of the world want to support. You know, for me, charity, I've always been, since I was 8 years old, been a part of various charities. I think charity starts at the bottom. Who is the most in need? So one of my causes I've told you about, developmentally disabled orphans in countries like India, because I have 3 adopted sisters. It's a cause that's important to me. You know, you didn't choose to be developmentally disabled. You didn't choose to be born in a country where there's fewer resources. I think that's where the money should go. And I think that given to some of the charities like that, that I make sure use the money properly, is a lot more beneficial than even to Gabriel Zucman. But it's some of those very people in some of those very countries, maybe not India per se, but certainly African countries, that said this global minimum tax is going to take money away from us. And some of them are still not on board with it. Some of them could not be bullied. And so what have I been telling you? What's interesting about BRICS and the so-called global south and all this stuff where the US overplayed its hand, to some extent Europe overplayed its hand, they sanctioned 4 times as many people in places this century as they ever had before, is people whose countries who were already emerging to some extent are like, you know what? The US is not our friend. Oh, there's China. Oh, there's Russia. Oh, there's Saudi Arabia. Oh, they have money now too. Oh, they want to work with us. Oh, okay, we'll do that. That seems better than the US, which bullies us and lectures us and puts us on their naughty lists. Hey, working with Saudi Arabia seems pretty good. And so now they have an out. And some of those big countries are going to be like, yeah, we don't want to tax people on their wealth no matter where they live. We want to be a safe haven. And they will give some cover to smaller countries. And what have I told you? You want to have residence permits and citizenship. And with that, perhaps you could get some kind of small bank account. But you want to have that in countries that are off the radar. When I see people who didn't want Trump to win, and now that Trump won, saying I'm moving to London and I'm buying homes in London, they're missing the point. They're not diversifying at all, really, in the grand scheme of things. Now, I'm not saying you should move to Tanzania, but you know what? I have an African citizenship. I think that's not the worst thing to have. And people can laugh all they want, but you know, I've been to more African countries than most people, and they're not my first choice to live, but there are places in them where I could live if I had to. If being a citizen of that country and living in a different tax-friendly country, let's say, you know, I'm Comorian living in Malaysia, if that got me out from having to pay Gabriel Zucman and potentially lose part of my wealth every year so he and his friends can use it as a grift, yeah, I'd be happy to have that. And I'd be happy not to have to be a Western citizen whose politicians want me to pay whatever they determine my fair share is. And so there have always been countries in opposition to this stuff because it's against their interests or because they just want to be competitive. In business, competition is a good thing. With these people, it's a bad thing. But guess what? What have I talked about? Small countries. Generally, the governments are more responsive, and they have a disincentive to go along with stuff like this because if you're a small country, your goal is to be competitive. Now, some of them will be roped into this, no doubt. But the more small countries, the more off the radar countries you have in your portfolio, the better. So we've shown you in Cairo, buy an apartment, get an Egyptian passport. Now, there's considerations you want to make for your life and your banking situation and all that before you just jump in. But if I can buy an apartment in one of the cheapest real estate, like I think one of the top 5 cheapest real estate markets in the world, I don't care how many problems the country has. When property is that cheap, I think if you do it properly, you'll be all right in the long run. Just not an investment advice, just my opinion. If I can buy a property, I've done this in Turkey. I bought a property in Turkey. It's worth quite a bit more than I paid for it. If you'd like the citizenship in Turkey, you can have the citizenship in Turkey. You know, Egypt being an African country, you know, that could potentially do the same thing. And now you've got a passport that as the African Union comes together, perhaps their response to this is, hey, African countries need to be stronger together to push back against this Western imperialism of wanting to make us less competitive. Because guess what? That's what the coups in the coup belt have been about in the last couple of years, is pushing back on the French and guys like Gabriel Zucman and their imperialism. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with them on that, that's what they're saying. I see more unity in some of these groups within Africa, within BRICS, within a number of these different groups. And I think some of them are going to resist this. And so if your thing is, hey, I'm American, I'm going to go live in London, or I'm going to go get a British passport, do that if you want. We help clients get citizenship by descent. I'm American, I'm Canadian, I'm Australian, my ancestors were Greek, I'll get a Greek passport. Great. That helps you in some ways. You can live anywhere in the European Union. But with this kind of stuff, not as helpful. I want you to have something off the wall. Who's not going to go along with this? Because you know what? Forget just about, oh, he just wants to keep his money. It is fundamentally unfair to tell someone they have to lose wealth every year because a guy who's never run a business in his life, who doesn't know how wealth is made other than how he can take it from you, for him to determine how much you should pay. He gets to determine the formulas, not you. You think they're going to bring in a bunch of business leaders to make the formula? No. They're going to dictate from the top. It's going to be dictate by fiat, and they will take whatever they want. Their real goal is to confiscate your wealth, because this is the kind, I don't know if this guy particularly, but people like him are the ones who say billionaires shouldn't exist. So if you have 10 billion, they'd be happy just to take 9.1 billion, and now you're not a billionaire anymore. Now, we do have billionaires who watch this channel because they've become our clients. Most of us aren't billionaires. The numbers, he already wants to start at 100 million. Imagine once inflation goes again. Imagine once, you know what, let's just make it 50 million. Or let's make it 30 million. And by the way, we're going to start valuing your business. If you've got a business that makes a couple $1 million a year, you may not consider yourself that rich. You may have worked really hard to build that. That business could be worth $30 million. Wouldn't be that hard. Plus you have a house, you have some stuff hanging around. They could get you to 30 million. They could probably get you to 50 million. And again, in 10 years' time with inflation, they could get you to 100 million. Now you're sending whatever Gabriel Zucman wants to his people. So it can be wasted. So nothing can be solved. Because it's you, the capitalist, who reduced abject poverty from over 50% in the 60s to less than 10% before the pandemic. It's not him. It's not him taking and redistributing your money that did almost any of that, because tax rates around the world actually went down during much of that time. Corporate tax rates in the places like Norway, for example, that realized they had to be competitive to some extent. This is why I tell you that you want places that are off the radar in your portfolio. It's something that only really Nomad Capitalist offers. You can go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. I stood in the living room of one of our wealthiest clients ever. He said, I hired all the big four. They told me Switzerland. They told me Europe. He said, what I like about you is you talk about the places that no one else really knows much about, I guess. And let me tell you, no one knows. I joined a fancy London concierge service. Cost me $35,000 a year. They can't book a car for me in Istanbul. Does 200 euros okay? Yeah, I think I'll take the $9 taxi, thank you. They literally can't book a car for me. Nobody else knows about this stuff. We have an entire research department. I'm sending people to an African country, 3 of them. I don't know, sometime in the next month, they're going to an African country that we dug through their laws, not in English, and found out they have a citizenship program, potentially. And we're going to go and get to the bottom of it. And if it's approved, and if it's legit, we're going to offer it to our clients. You've never heard of this? You probably haven't heard of the country, but you certainly haven't heard of the program. Who else does that? Me, because I'm obsessed with this. Why? Well, I enjoy it. And I want to make damn sure that more of you don't have to give your money to Gabriel Zucman. Not because you'd miss the money, because how dare he get his grubby mitts on what you worked so hard for. But he's not going to stop trying to put in more minimum taxes on every single thing you do. And look what we're seeing on citizenship-based taxation. It might take a while, but there's going to be scope creep, and eventually this kind of thing will come in, unless you are protected.